Good evening. By now, you all will have finished watching the film Soda, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about it. My name is Mark Drumbl. I'm a law professor at Washington and Lee University in Virginia, and I have been working in the space of the Israeli Kapo trials for a number of years. And by working, I mean researching and thinking and writing about it. So I'm really delighted with the opportunity to be able to speak with you now about this particular film. And as you well know from having watched it, the theme of the Capo is a thread that runs through it. The film builds this up in a somewhat suspenseful sense. We don't really know who the Capo is or is alleged to be, or if she really even is a Capo. But at some point, it surfaces that Eva, the seamstress, in her majestic beauty, her aloofness, her elegance, and her artistry, and her loving child, Hannah, it surfaces that there are whispers and wonderings and a bewilderment about the reality or not that she is seen to have been a capo. And this is one of the themes that arises in the film. So I think what I would like to do is take about 5 or 10 minutes of your time before you head back home and perhaps shed a little bit of light on the historical realities of capos, on the criminal proceedings that did take place in Israel in the late 1950s and early 1960s, so roughly coterminous with the time slot of the Soda movie, and then also ask a couple of broader questions about takeaways regarding the idea of community. In the Nazi death camps, roughly 10% of all prisoners participated in what was called the self-administration of the prisons. So this meant that detainees in Holocaust concentration and death camps, about 1 in 10 participated in the administration of the camps. And they were called capos. So what did they do? They were the leaders of certain blocks in which individuals were detained. They participated and led forced labor movements. They were complicit in the administration and organization of the deaths in the crematoria. The average capo, in exchange for these services, tended to live about 5 to 6 months longer than other detainees. Ironically, most of what we know about how the concentration camps, such as Auschwitz, worked, we know because surviving capos were able to offer great detail with regards to the horrid nature of the Nazi death machine. After the liberation of the camps, which was mostly by the Russians, as you all know, and the foundation of the State of Israel, quite a number of Holocaust survivors emigrated to the newly created State of Israel. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, a societal phenomenon happened, just like in Soda, namely, in the communities of Holocaust survivors who were making fresh and new starts in Israel, whispers emerged, and people were recognized as having served as capos in the camps. And they were remembered by other survivors. The capos were remembered for the beatings they inflicted, for the collaboration they undertook, for the collusion that they connived. And they were then publicly identified. In response to this, the Knesset passed a legislation called the Nazi and Nazi Collaborators Punishment Act. And under this statute, roughly 40 trials were held in the late 50s and early 60s against capos as Nazi collaborators. In these trials, a number led to conviction, and the average sentence was 17 months imprisonment. That said, the trials were knotted and gnarly. Judges struggled with questions about whether and how such individuals should be punished for the acts that they did in the most iniquitous, vile, and ugly of places, namely camps such as Auschwitz. The trials led to considerable public conversation and consternation. And the film brings this out, right? This idea of disbelief that someone could collaborate, the idea of fresh and new starts, such as the woman who identifies Ava as a capo herself tells the others, in particular Shalom, that just leave her alone. This theme also emerges in literature. Primo Levi, one of the foremost authors and writers about the Holocaust, in Survival in Auschwitz, lambastes the capos as the bottom of the base of baseness, but then refuses to judge them and say that no earthly court can judge a capo for what he or she did. Rather, this is simply for a heavenly court ultimately to decide. We see all of these swirls in the movie Soda. Ultimately, the Kapo trials are abandoned. And under the Nazi and Nazi Collaborators Punishment Act, the second set of trials that occurs is the trial of one person. That's Adolf Eichmann, who formally led the final solution. And in an important shift in the Eichmann trial, some of the very capos who were charged and prosecuted as capos in the capo trials then became witnesses for the prosecution against Adolf Eichmann. And there they testified how the sheer iniquity and the sheer depravity of the Nazi extermination plan could be discussed by a capo because the ugliness of the Nazi scheme reveled in getting the persecuted to persecute other members of the persecuted class. And the pain, the humiliation, and the degradation of that was constructed as existential to the notion of genocide. Today in Israel, the term capo is still bandied about. And it is not only bandied about in terms of historical discussions of World War II and the Holocaust, but it is also delivered as a slur against individuals, in particular Jews, who are seen as unfaithful to the policies of the State of Israel. So this term lives on in a very negative connotation. Another very important angle of the Kapo conversation, of course, which Soda surfaces, is how do communities of survivors survive in terms of their embedded shared trauma? What does it mean to survive? Are there proper ways to survive? Are there ugly ways to survive? Can a survivor be excommunicated from a community of survivors by dint of how he or she has engaged in survival tactics during times of atrocity? Do capos lose their entitlement to live in Israel? Do they face expulsion? In the film, Eva ends up moving to Australia. And this is not a concocted quirk. Quite a number of capos ended up moving to the furthest Antipodean place on the planet, namely Australia, to just get away and to make this new start. And in fact, there's some interesting cinematography on capos in interviews, in documentaries that have been made that do take place in Australia. Another interesting angle to the Kapo conversation, which also surfaces in the film, is that quite a number of surviving capos are women. And this is in large part due to the fact that the Nazis established women's slave labor and death camps along with men's camps. And quite a number of the women seem to have slightly higher survival rates. And as a result, the reality of the capo and the number of women capos offers a fascinating historical perspective into how women experience violence, atrocity, conflict, and war. Another important theme in the film, of course, is searching for the names broadcast on the radio, searching for feeling, love, searching for life, searching for the truth, and also searching for community. And in this space, the figure of the capo reflects the search for the human condition, the search for what it means to be human in profoundly unstable times. And once again, to close the circle, the capo and the figure of the capo, just like the figure of collaborators more generally, is always an easily risible and easily dislikable character. I've also written a book on informers, which is another category of individuals who, in times of authoritarianism and conflict, serve to underscore the complexities of the human condition. Another angle on Ava that is also very interesting is the reality that, in addition to being a capo, she also had a romantic or coerced relationship with a German officer. And in this particular capacity, underscores and opens another very controversial element of surviving atrocity, namely the reliance on relationships to make it through. So that's another theme. At the end of the day, I think it's a very thought-provoking film, and I'm glad to be able to have set out what these capo trials looked like in Israel, their complexity. In the film, one of the characters refers to the capo law as worthless. And in this particular space, I think that is a historical question. At the end of the day, it is always a reckoning in processes of survivorship and victimhood and community, who is in and who is out. And just as the state of Israel experienced great cataclysm and tumult and dissensus over whether the Kapo trials should have taken place, this film, in this one individual case, I believe, does a good job in setting that out as well. Enjoy your evening.